Od čiernych dier cez gravitačné vlny až po mentoring. Veda nás obklopuje na každom kroku. Vítajte pri špeciálnom vedátorskom podcaste, v ktorom sa bude Samuel rozprávať o vede a prírode okolo nás. Tento podcast vzniká v spolupráci so Sme. Dovoľte nám privítať dnešného špeciálneho hostia, výnimočného vedca, ktorého, ako sa zdá, nemusíme zvlášť predstavovať. Pomedzi program sa zrazu podarilo na Starmuse vybaviť jeho účasť na podcaste a tak je tu Samo sám. Tento podcast bude v angličtine. Pre dostupnosť pre všetkých si môžete podcast pustiť na YouTube, ktorý umožňuje zapnutie titulkov. Enjoy!
Thank you for finding the time, and I will start with an interesting question that I wanted to ask you for a long time. Does black hole merger violate the time symmetry?
So, the physics of black holes violates time symmetry. The physics of classical black holes, but so do a lot of things at the macroscopic scale. There's a time symmetry. It's only at the microscopic scale as a property of some of the laws of physics. But black holes can merge. They can't be broken apart, for example. That was one of the great theorems that Stephen Hawking proved very early, around 1973, so 72.
If you make a simulation of black hole merger and run it backwards, it means if you could just focus the gravitational waves very precisely, couldn't it split the singularity, make it torn apart?
Well, the theorems we have are about the horizon, not singularity, because singularity is controlled by the laws of quantum gravity, which we don't understand. The horizon is pure classical general relativity, and by the very structure of the horizon, that it's a boundary between, by definition, it's the boundary between regions that can communicate with future infinity and those that cannot. That has already built in a time asymmetry into it, just the very definition of the horizon. The fact that it's a useful definition, however, is the important thing. It's a very useful definition.
So it's not just a function of entropy being always growing and...
Well, it is intimately related to entropy always growing, because the surface area of the black hole, or the sum of the surface areas of black holes, if you have several of them, is directly proportional to the entropy of the system, or at least to the contribution from the black holes. And that's a theorem that was it was originally a speculation. Mm-hmm. And originally a speculation that was rather imprecise from Jacob Bekenstein, who was a student at the time of John Wheeler's. It was then became a sort of a theorem from Stephen Hawking, but it was a theorem at a level of a speculation as well. But the people very deep into string theory and candidate theories and quantum gravity have proved that this is the case. If you identify the entropy in terms of numbers and degrees of freedom at the quantum level, then entropy is, again, as Stephen and Bekenstein had speculated, the entropy really is proportional to the surface area of the black hole.
But with the entropy, it's like there is a thin line between something being impossible and very hard.
Yes.
Uncooking the egg is very hard, but not impossible. And isn't it the same case with black holes? It's very hard, but not impossible.
The experts would claim that when we fully understand the laws of quantum gravity, it will also be impossible, as it appears to be. But I think it is an open question until we fully understand the laws of quantum gravity.
And when you think about the singularity, do you have some picture in mind, like from the string theory, or just it's a blurred something, or?
Well, from my point of view, singularity is a place where the laws of general relativity break down and presumably get replaced by laws of quantum gravity. They break down because the space-time curvature becomes infinite formally, classically. The it was John Wheeler, who was my PhD advisor in Feynman, who really focused on the singularity and initially said, well, these things cannot occur in nature, and therefore I don't believe in black holes, basically, he said. Then he changed his point of view and said, they don't occur in nature, therefore I believe it's necessary to unify general relativity and quantum theory, and that they will tell us what happens, and that still is, I think, the point of view that at least the vast majority of theoretical physicists would take.
Because I started researching quantum space, what was it, maybe 10 years ago, and one of the promises is that maybe it can explain what happened, well, not properly explain, but just give you some sense of the changes we can expect from the quantum gravity. And one of them is, well, the singularity is blurred in a way, which, for example, prevents the Hawking temperature from going to infinity, and it drops suddenly. So maybe it's a good dark matter candidate or something like that. So you don't have a particular, because I was just reading Susskind's paper about black hole wars, which is the fuzzball stringy thing stretching all around. So you don't ascribe to any of those.
I have never studied these things deeply for personal reasons, that I have chosen to focus on areas in physics that are not crowded. And
this is like the quantum space, which is
the most crowded area of theoretical physics, because it's the most interesting, because it's the most fundamental. But I am very well aware of how fallible I am, how poorly I understand what's going on, and very sensitive to the fact that there are other people, and Susskind is one, who obviously understand this far more deeply than I possibly could. And so I admire what they do, but I take no sides on this. There's one thing where I have tended to take a side, and I had a bet with Stephen Hawking and John Preskill, but that is that it seems to me reasonably likely that if you form a black hole and then it evaporates, that the evolution is non-unitary, or as they say colloquially, that information is lost. But the only reason that I think that, well, there are two reasons I think that's fairly likely. One is that people who try to preserve unitarity in the face of various thought experiments that get done wind up having great difficulties and invoking things like firewalls, which are very extreme. And the second reason, however, is that I have been impressed by the much greater power that the Feynman path integral approach to quantum gravity appears to have, or to gravity period, quantum mechanics period, appears to have, than the standard Hamiltonian formulation. That the path integral approach can deal with the entire universe and deal with an observer who's inside the systems that's been quantized, as in Hartle and Galois. I'm very sensitive to the fact that Galois and Feynman didn't get along, and despite that, Galois came around and adopted path integrals as a foundation for studying cosmology. And I knew both Galois and Feynman extremely well, so that also carried weight with me. But then that you can perfectly well do path integrals in a space-time that has if you're doing say fields in some background space-time, you can do it in space-times that have close time-like curves, in space-times that are non-causal space-times. The path integral quantum mechanics can still be done. It has enormous versatility. And within a path integral formulation, you have no difficulty at all with information being lost with non-unitary evolution. It's just built right into it. And so I've, for a long time, been much impressed by that fact. And that was the reason that, for me, to make this bet together with Stephen Hawking, Stephen and I on one side, about information lost out of black holes with John Preskill, Stephen conceded the bet ultimately. I don't think he should have. I never conceded, but it's irrelevant that I never conceded because Stephen is much greater.
But he was considered a stubborn one, so...
I'm more stubborn.
Even more.
But I'm even more stubborn, but I think I have better reasons to believe it.
Okay. You, mentioned several things I wanted to comment on. So the first is you mentioned closed time-like curves, which basically are a possibility opened, for example, by wormholes, which you use for the for the novel contact, but then basically created new area of research. With the time travel, what happens with the entropy of the system? Does it goes up and down, or it's constant, or?
I think that the entropy and the other laws of physics in the presence of closed time-like curves, what I would say is that I expect that the laws of physics all valid locally, and entropy increases in a local sense. So there's an issue of what happens with energy conservation. Well, you have a wormhole and stuff goes in, and the mass of that mouth goes down gravitationally, and stuff comes out. I mean, the mass goes up and stuff comes out, and the mass of that mouth goes down. All the local laws of physics, I think, will be preserved. You have changes globally, but not locally is what I expect.
Because for me it was interesting from the point of view that, we use the growth of entropy to direct the time. And I think it was either Smolin or Carlo Rovelli in one of his papers just mentioned the idea that maybe it goes up and down, the entropy. That might mean that you would feel... It's difficult to wrap the head around. What would you feel going in the time loop?
Well, there were these speculations going way back. John Koch, who was a colleague of mine many years ago, probably in the early 1960s, and others speculated that the entropy increases as the universe expands, decreases as it contracts. But that just means that both sides... The direction of the future is, we would normally define it as toward the
the meeting point.
Toward the meeting point. And then it's a very interesting question what happens at the meeting point. When Christopher Nolan conceived the ideas for the movie Tenet, I found that also very interesting. Suppose you do have a person or an object who's, as defined by entropy, its direction of time flow is opposite of the rest of the universe. What happens at the interface? I think these are very interesting questions, and the issue of whether or not you can formulate physics in the presence of something like that, I find quite interesting. Though I've had higher priority things to work on, so I haven't really dug into it. But I find these issues of the relationship between local arrow of time and global issues fascinating and potentially quite important.
And you now mentioned two important topics. The first was the contact I mentioned first, and then Interstellar. So use the power of storytelling to bring science toward people. But science is like two aspects. It's like for the technological benefits, but it's also to make us appreciate the universe more, to touch us emotionally. So you can use the storytelling to touch us emotionally, to show how the science is very human at a very basic level. Can you use the storytelling also to show to people how science is important technologically, or how can we actually maybe explain quantum mechanics within a story?
No, I think this really is very powerful, very useful. It's very important. And in my case, doing this in Interstellar, it was a true collaboration with Christopher Nolan, a fabulous storyteller and also filmmaker, who understands from having browsed the web, understands physics at a reasonably deep level.
Okay.
Of course, not
as impressive
as a professional person, but deep enough to challenge me on things I might claim and force me to go do a real calculation and find out that I was wrong. And so the combination of working with somebody like that, who's really just a fabulous storyteller, and embedding science jointly through joint brainstorming into this film, I just found it to be enormously fun, but also I think the product was really quite good in terms of inspiring people. This has been my impression. So I really do appreciate the power of storytelling, primarily thanks to Christopher Nolan.
Yes, amazing result. Whenever I watch something, I'm like, should I watch a new movie or rewatch Lord of the Rings or Interstellar again? And, well, usually I don't pause movies or TV series.
No.
Once I paused Simpsons, and it was very quick subtitles, and when you paused, it was like, if you're reading this, you have no life. But I also paused Interstellar to see the blackboards, and there was like 10-dimensional integration or something. So I saw some hints of string theory, and then I read the science of Interstellar, and you very neatly describe how we went from physics we are sure of to more hypothetical things.
Yeah.
Is there something you left out, like being even too hypothetical for the movie?
I don't think I had any hesitance about putting stuff in, really. But what I did try to do, and so let me back up. I did try to make sure that everything in the movie, there was some variant of the laws of physics is compatible with what we do know, that was also compatible with what was in the movie. The hardest thing to deal with was Christopher Nolan's version of the Tesseract in the end of the movie. So I have 3 chapters in my book about the science of Interstellar that explain that. But the rationale for the ending of the movie that I give was something that came again from brainstorming with him for many hours to bring it into a form that I could feel comfortable with within some variant of our laws of physics, with a space-time structure that had close time-like curves in the bulk, but not in our brain. And that was the key. It was, and where signals, light rays, and so forth were traveling through the surface of a tesseract, but it was a generalized tesseract that is not a standard tesseract that had multiple copies of itself going out spatially. Anyway, in a manner I describe in the film. But that process with Chris of trying to...
But I like this little touch. I explained it in the film. I would like to be able to do that at some point. Please finish.
No. Well, no, it's just to say that he and I agreed we would try very hard to brainstorm into a final form that was justifiable by some variant of the laws of physics that was consistent with everything that we know about the universe and about the laws. And that was a fun process. And a lot of the ideas behind that are in those blackboards.
And this is interesting because we just have a new book, which is illustrated by illustrator, which knows very little science. And for me, the best part of working on the book was brainstorming the illustrations and coming back and forth, and this was so much fun. And probably this was the same with you.
Same thing.
Yeah. So maybe we as scientists should be doing more of this, and probably you have a new book also which combines art with science.
So that sort as well. Very much so.
Yeah. So maybe we should be doing more like this interaction between different communities, understanding ourselves from a different point of view. Yeah. And as you mentioned, brainstorming. This was interesting to me because basically your career started with a very good question from Wheeler about what happens with magnetic fields, if they collapse or not. You came up with the Hopf conjecture, and then you also had a lot of your own students, very, very long list, very interesting people. But when I read your book, Black Holes and Time Warps, you said you are a lone wolf. You wanted to get away and just work on your own, go through the equations. This was the same for me. Like when I was at the Dublin Institute in Ireland, sometimes the best day for me was just being alone in the office but now in Bratislava I have my own students and also in Brno working with students. I really enjoy the brainstorming part. So How do you balance those two things?
I think a big part of that is that I always had a huge number of ideas for research projects. And so I could create a research group where there were many ideas floating around in the group, and where the students were interacting with each other and stimulating each other. But I got great pleasure from being by myself and working on particular projects that were important to me by myself. All my students were working on their projects separately, but for a balanced intellectual life, I needed both. Mm-hmm. I needed the interactivity with the students and the postdocs, their interactivity with each other, but I also needed long stretches of quiet time by myself. So I would go away often we built a home in Oregon, 1,000 kilometers away from where I lived in Pasadena. And I would go up there for many weeks at a time, but still have interaction with my students electronically and by video. Once we had video conferences, and the research would go on, but I would have truly quiet time to myself, especially up there. It was a little harder when I was living at home in Pasadena.
And you're very good at picking projects. You said you have way too many ideas, but for example, you pick the project of detecting gravitational waves, which at some point seemed completely impossible. Not unboiling the egg impossible, but technologically very, very, very difficult.
I didn't choose it. I didn't make that decision to do that until things were far enough along, and I understood the challenges well enough that I thought we had a reasonable probability of success. I won't say precisely what that meant, but it meant something like a 50% probability of ultimately success. Now, whether it was 30% or 70%, but at least it was not 1% or 10%. And once I could see that there was a reasonable possibility of success, then I also knew it was going to be very difficult. It required building a new research group. And I was able to convince Caltech to put $2 million of its own money into getting it started at a time when that $2 million is today worth $10 or $15 million. So substantial amount of private investment when federal funding agencies were not willing to put money into it. And so we made that decision jointly, me together with my physics colleagues at Caltech, and pushed forward with it. That became the central piece of my research program, but it was not by any means the only piece. I had students and postdocs and myself doing other things in parallel, except for certain crucial periods. When we got the funding to build LIGO, then there was a 10-year period when we did nothing but this. We were getting it off the ground, and I was worrying about getting the data analysis started. I was worrying about bringing the computer simulations of colliding black holes together so that it would reach fruition at least by the time we were collecting data. So there was a 10-year period roughly from 2000 or from about 1991 to 2001 when it was very single-minded. But other than that, there were other things going on.
Okay, and what do you think is the next black hole thing, like black hole gravitational wave things, like something we considered impossible at some point and now seems within the technological reach?
I don't know.
I don't
know. I mean, my attitude about these things, at least for myself, was almost from the beginning to watch for unexpected opportunities and evaluate them as carefully as I could before I made a choice to do that. I had no intention of getting involved in searches for gravitational waves until the opportunity came along, in the sense that Ray Weiss invented the interferometers, and I spent enough time talking with him and Vladimir Berdinsky in Moscow and doing calculations of my own to see we had a real chance of success. Then I went for it. I never intended to get involved in computer simulations of colliding black holes until it was obvious that we needed it, and there was an opportunity to do it successfully for LIGO. I don't know what the next thing is. I would simply be watching for an unexpected opportunity.
Well, I'm studying quantum space.
Yeah.
The first bit came with this idea of, I think, Snyder, a very long time ago. And this seemed like an impossible task to, verify. But then came some ideas that, maybe quantum space can slow down light depending on the wavelength. And now there are some hints that maybe very far sources of gamma ray burst, some of the photons will arrive early, and maybe in 10 years we'll see a difference. So now I'm trying, this is a career choice, like, should I go in? And it was like, the GRB, very strong burst, what was it, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, which again can be explained by this quantum structure of space. So maybe I'm now in your position back then, so trying to decide. And I feel that maybe this has crossed the 50-50. So what do you think? Is this too early to call it a good idea, or you don't?
I don't.
No worry, I won't blame you.
I don't have enough. No, I only made a decision about gravitational waves after an enormous number of conversations with experimenters. So I say especially Weiss and Brzezinski, and a lot of calculations of my own, making estimates, also thinking a lot about sources. So it really did take me about 3 years to make that decision. And I don't...
You don't jump to conclusions very quickly.
Not if it's something where you're making a decision whether you devote much or most or all of your career for 10 years to it. I would want to evaluate it very carefully. But I think being open to the possibilities, the first step, the really important first step, is looking at things like and paying attention to new possibilities.
Was there a point in this journey where you thought, whoops, like you crossed, the probability crossed 50-50 the other way?
No. I think once I'd made the decision, everything came together. It was slower than I expected, but to maybe took twice as long as I at first expected. After about 20 years, I had a better understanding of how long it was going to take. But no, there was no point where we ran into anything that made me feel like the show had been stopped and we should give up. Not at all. I think the key thing was that the experimental team that I was working with, the experimenters they were very good, and they were the best in the world at this kind of stuff, and I thought they were capable of doing it. And the interesting thing is, our funding officer at NSF, he didn't tell me this, but I mean, he told other people, "Why do you think this is going to succeed?" He would tell people, because Kip says it will. And I didn't realize that it was really depending on me in that sense. But it's true that I was probably the only person who was really close to both the experiment and the sources and the data analysis. Although I was not really at the center of doing any of these things. I was more at the center of providing an atmosphere in which other people who were better than I was worked the problems that it seemed to me were important to be worked.
I also asked this question because tomorrow I'm probably hosting the Starmus for School. There will be also Jane Goodall with her Reason for Hope, but she'll be also talking about climate change. And now we are in the era of very short attention span. And this is a very long-run issue. We heard from Stephen Chu, 75 years to turn the boat, turn the ship. How do you find the courage to tackle those long-term problems? What should I tell young people tomorrow?
Well, in our case, I mean, my real partner in the deepest sense in the gravitational waves that Ray watched at MIT. But we have had the same view. We knew this was a long project. We knew it was ultra difficult, but the process was enormously fun. We enjoyed the process. In our case, and it's presumably true in climate change issues, the richness of different pieces of physics and engineering that were required to make this come together. Physics, engineering, and mathematics, actually, computer science. There was such a rich diversity of things that had to come together. That added to the fun, it added to the interest, it added to winding up in a collaboration where there were a lot of interesting people doing it. I didn't like being in a big collaboration, but given that it had to be a big collaboration, the fact that it was so rich in range of physics and engineering, mathematics, computer science, was a major contributor to the joy of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. So you don't get joy only from the result, but also from the partial.
Oh, I think there's more joy from the process than from the result.
So hopefully this will be the reason for hope for young people. Find your short-term projects which you can solve, and then gradually, step by step, we can solve this long-term problem.
So my granddaughter, when she decided she was going to become a physicist, it was obviously because of me. I told her, you don't love it enough. It's not fun enough for you. So you use it as a springboard to go in some other direction. It's a great way to start. And I told her that over and over again until she found a PhD thesis that she loved. And I don't tell her that anymore.
So young people should find something.
But you've got to find something that you really enjoy doing thoroughly. If your goals are really ambitious, and that means working on something that's very difficult, you've got to enjoy it.
So this is a great point too.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
No a týmto sa náš čas naplnil. Viete, kde nás všade nájdete, kde nás máte počúvať. Môžete nás počúvať napríklad aj cez apku Vedátorskú. Nedávno vyšli naše rozhovory o vesmíre ako knižka, tiež sa dá všelikde objednávať a na leto chystáme niekoľko akcií, takže sledujte. Všetko bude buď v apke alebo u nás na sociálnych sieťach. No a to už z našej strany na dnes všetko. Majte sa pekne.
Chcete vedieť, kde barania masť pochúťka? Čo vám treba na zdolanie 7000-ovky a ako spraviť zo stráženia mačky vytúženú dovolenku?
Odpovede aj na tieto otázky nájdete v novej sérii cestovateľského Všesvet podcastu.
Nájdete ho každý útorok vo všetkých podcastových aplikáciách, na YouTube či na stránke Sme.sk s Tínou Paholik-Hamárovou a Lukášom Onderčaninom.